The Poseidon Adventure kicks off our 70s disaster season with a Gene Hackman-led capsized ship on New Year's Eve. Let's see if this practical effects blockbuster still delivers spectacle in a modern CGI-dominated world. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Don't worry, Mr. Peter. I once helped my dad pull in a 600-pound swordfish in Hawaii.
This is a movie podcast. We get together and we talk about a movie. In fact, we work through seasons of movies, which will often be a franchise. It might be a batch of movies by the same actor or director. Or in this case, we're working through a subgenre. So this is actually the start of our 70s disaster movie season. It's not every 70s disaster movie. In fact, it kind of neatly split into half for the sake of how long we wanted this to be. So
I also don't think that that's every disaster movie, but
all the ones that are probably worth it. There was a lot of TV movies
that's fair.
I was ignoring, but yeah, so this is going to be about half of the 70s disaster movies over the next 5 weeks, plus as a bonus episode on Patreon, which is very relevant to the one we're doing today.
Yes.
So not all the big ones are in this seaon because we wanted to distribute the big titles evenly between the two seasons. So season 2 will come maybe sometime later in 2023, maybe a bit later than that, depending on how the schedule is looking. It's pretty packed at the moment.
The schedule is full to burst.
Yes. But yes, so we're starting with one of the biggest titles of the 70s disaster subgenre, and that is the Poseidon Adventure. Starting with a bang, or a wave, you might say. So yes, this is the capsizing ship movie starring Gene Hackman. We'll get into who else is in it in a bit. But this is very much our first. Obviously, disaster movie can mean a number of things. It can typically you'll think of it as either some sort of natural disaster or some kind of crisis in a structure or vessel, or it could be a building. Obviously, Towering Inferno's not one we're doing this season, but is also one of the most famous examples of a 70s disaster movie. This is a ship capsizing because of a tidal wave movie. So. That's what we're going to get into. We'll start spoiler free, as we always do. We'll give you a warning before we get to spoilers. But the main gist of it is basically the one sentence premise I already gave you. But we have Gene Hackman as kind of like a hard hitting, like
the hard boiled preacher.
Yeah. I think the official title in the movie was Reverend. I think they'd call him a Reverend at one point.
True.
So he sort of has to lead the survivors after the capsize happens. And as with any disaster movie, and that's one of the interesting things I think about going through a batch of these in succession, is we're going to see some of the things that connect them, even when it's a very different crisis. Because coming up, we're going to have like outbreaks of virus, we're going to have fires, we're going to have other types of disaster. But one of the things that sort of connects them all, I think, from what I know of the ones that I've seen so far, is sort of the ensemble cast of like various memorable characters, so that we can follow a group of people going through the crisis. So we'll get into who those characters are in just a bit, but that's pretty much it. But yeah, it's a group of characters trying to survive and find their way through an upside down ship. That's the movie. That's all it is.
Long story short.
Yes. So I think I'd also boil down disaster movies in general to, once you've set up what the disaster is, it's effectively the characters trying to survive a series of set pieces where there's an obstacle. How do we get past this obstacle? It's risky. Someone might die going through the said obstacle, and then on to the next obstacle. And then by the time you get to the end, you're hoping that you felt that you've went through an adventure. If it's been a good disaster movie, you'll feel like, oh, that was a journey, getting to this point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you'll have the variables in there of like each character's role adding their own sets of problems and their own solutions to problems. But boilerplate-wise, it is literally just how many trials can we get through that relate to this particular thing.
Yeah. And then perhaps on a quality perspective, like, do they all feel believable enough as set pieces go? Do they all feel like realistic enough dangers that they can either live through, or even just is the predicament itself realistic that it would happen in this crisis kind of thing? By and large, I would say that disaster movies aren't inherently realistic because they're entertainment and they want to be exciting. So,
I mean, I think that there are disasters themselves that are realistically portrayed, but coming out of there's a hero leading a band of survivors.
Sure.
Yeah, that part's a little bit more unrealistic.
I always assumed that anyone who is an expert, and in this case maybe ships, being overturned or whatever. Like,
I mean, I would say that even the tidal wave itself, because I may be completely wrong on this,
Sure.
but I remember hearing that the 2004 tsunami that hit was kind of like the first tsunami that was actually like filmed, the first one that there was a lot of study of what it looked like, and that's where people got tidal wave from, because when people were describing it, they were like, it was just this huge wave. And we know what that actually means now is not tall, but just like an unrelenting surge forward. So in this case, I think that the unrealistic comes from the fact that it's a 90-foot tall single wave rather than just a giant shelf of water moving in.
Yeah, that's fair. It happens a lot with space movies, where obviously anyone who works at NASA will watch a movie set in space and just laugh at every little thing that's just nonsense. I feel like these movies are probably quite similar in that anyone who knows anything about certain topics, in this case it's a ship, or how water works, or the different areas of a ship and where the access points are. I mean, hell, we notice it in regular movies. I remember, as part of a Patreon thing, and I'm sure some movie will eventually do for one subject or another, but it's Speed, the fact that there's like 3 different access panels on the bottom of this bus, and I'm like, I've been on many buses and I have never seen a panel on the floor that opens to get to the underside of the bus ever in my life. So
clearly you've never been on an American bus.
That's true.
They're everywhere.
That's true. I've never been on a bus in Los Angeles, so I can't say for sure if it's inaccurate, but it felt pretty inaccurate. But I think if you're going to enjoy disaster movies, I think you have to get into it and just sort of like go along for the ride. Ultimately, if you want to nitpick the believability of any of the situations, they're probably not for you. If it's going to bother you, they're not for you.
There's also a thing in disaster movies, and this one kind of falls prey to it, of how sentient does the disaster seem? Like, how much is it literally hunting down our survivors and making sure they pay?
I will say there's one moment in this, which I won't spoil yet because we're in spoiler free, where the timing of it happening is so comical how quickly it is after a certain thing.
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
I started chuckling a little bit. Like, really movie, we're doing it right away. Like, but whatever. I mean, I want to say this might be considered the first one, or the first big successful disaster movie. This is 1972. I think this is the one that kind of inspired. Maybe it was Airport. Maybe it was Airport early. I don't know. I'd have to check.
Airport was 1970.
Okay, so Airport was first. So Airport kicked off. It's literally the first year of the decade as well. So, there's, and we're not doing Airport because there's actually enough of those on its own to just be its own trilogy. Plus, if you throw an Airplane as a sort of extra to that, then you get like a whole franchise out of it. So there is a sequel to this. Good time to mention this, that our bonus episode on Patreon this month is going to be Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, the sequel starring Michael Caine, which I didn't know he was in it until I looked like 10 minutes ago.
I didn't know it until you just told me that.
Yeah. So Michael Caine's in there, and a couple of other... Peter Boyle, who we just saw in the Santa Claus movies, is in it. So exciting.
Everything just ties together here.
I know, it's beautiful. So that's going to be the bonus episode. If you want to get access to that, all tiers on Patreon get access to that, and that'll be going up. If all goes to plan, it'll be up the same day this goes public. So go and check that out on Patreon. So cool stuff. But yeah, so we're introduced to our characters in the film. But before we get to actually all those details, I should probably just ask the question. David, did you enjoy the Poseidon Adventure? In fact, actually, additional question before you even answer that. Had you seen the Poseidon Adventure before this?
No, I have not seen it beforehand. And in terms of do I like it, yes. It's not, I'm not going to put many strings on that. I think that it was just an enjoyable enough movie. I do find myself lacking in experience of pretty much every movie we're going to watch. I'm not very experienced in 70s disaster movies specifically, or even really good disaster movies, I'll say. Because obviously, I was a teenager when we got 2012 and stuff like that. Like, the long string of just horrible disaster movies that came out in the late 2000s. I've seen those.
I mean,
but to see it, no, go ahead.
My exposure to them was probably the 90s, because 90s had like, its own era of disaster movies.
True.
And I feel like that's an obvious season to do at some point, is the 90s, because that's where you've got Volcano and Dante's Peak, you've got Daylight, you've got Twisters, another big famous one.
I mean, I'll go ahead and just put out there, I had a very protective mother, and I did not get to see those movies.
So I sort of grew up in those, so I went back and like discovered, not all, I mean, I will say this, like, I've seen this movie before, and I've seen The Towering Inferno before, and I've seen Earthquake and The First Airport, so which are arguably the 4 biggest of the 70s disaster movies. But because obviously I went looking for, lesser known ones to try and have a nice variety of big and small films, this is the only one out of this batch of 5 that I've seen before. Every other one we're doing for the rest of this season are a first time watch for me, which is kind of fun, because I was like, I want to see what these are like, see what the rest of the variety was of sorts. So that's interesting. But obviously, I think what's interesting though, comparing this era of disaster movies to in part the 90s, but certainly to what you're talking about, the 2012 era, the Roland Emmerich just goes full nuts with
Emmerich, that was the name I was looking for. Yep.
Day After Tomorrow, all that stuff. Is that these ones are definitely, at least this one is. I mean, obviously we're getting to some weirder ones later on. Like, we get to the big bus. Like, I don't even know what we're going to say about that. But
I don't know.
I would say that this is based a bit more on, like, not necessarily a real event. I mean, it claims it is at the start, but I don't actually know if that's true.
No, it's based. There was a 1969 book called Poseidon Adventure. Okay, so it's just a novel adaptation.
Fair enough. But it's based on something that feels like, okay, this is plausible enough that a disaster like this has or could happen, that a boat can capsize, and, likewise Towering Inferno, it's a skyscraper that gets set on fire, and, I mean, obviously, there's a bit of a shadow over that now, because we've actually had like a really major disaster in the real, not the exact same, but 9/11 obviously comes to mind when you think about that subject. But those are very much based on things that seem relatively plausible, whereas you get to like 2012 and Day After Tomorrow, and it's like, no, there's like a wall of ice chasing a character down a hallway kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So they've gotten more extravagant and like very science fiction-y and like how they set up the premise.
It literally comes down to, this movie does this slow boil thing over the course of it, where not every, I guess, trial, not every issue they run into is this whole groundbreaking event of like, dear Lord, how are we ever going to... At one point, they just, the boat's upside down. They have to figure out how to get up a staircase. And it is literally a ramp. Like, they are able to just walk up it, but it's just a little bit slippery and some people need some help. It's not this, oh my God, blow your hair back events of how are they going to possibly survive it. It's just, hey, let's deal with this, and then we got to move on to the next thing.
It's a bit more grounded, because it's like, okay, we have a couple of people who are older or overweight. Like, how do we get them through this situation? Even though it is simpler, the water's starting to rise as the ship's sinking, obviously, so that's like a ticking time clock. It doesn't necessarily trying to dress it up in the most extreme, ridiculous, like, and in the case of modern movies, like, let's just face it, like, lots of CGI, like, destruction or whatever it does.
Literally, all that pops in my head whenever I think of that moment is the scene in 2012 where the ground is literally falling away as the plane is taking off. And then it's like, holds on it, and then the plane goes right up to the camera. Because that's all that I think of when I'm like, that was too much.
That's exactly the phrase.
I'm out.
There's a point where it becomes so over the top and ridiculous that it loses all sense of like you can't feel like being in the situation, because it's just like so cataclysmic that it feels like it's beyond like the realm of comprehension.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas everything in this, well, it might be far-fetched to anyone who actually knows the science behind a lot of these things, they still feel relatively, okay, simple problems, like there's a solution, can we get there, like where, like there's enough logic to the events that are happening, or at least to feel grounded enough that even if sometimes there's occasionally like a cheesy movie moment, or like a character has to like make a decision that feels like, I don't know, like they feels like they're being confrontational because the script wants them to be confrontational, as opposed to it feeling like a natural response to what's happening. Inherently though, I would say watching Poseidon Adventure feels a lot more grounded and relatable than when that one time I watched 2012 kind of half-assed and didn't really want to and didn't like it very much.
I mean, going on what you said of the characters feeling confrontational for the sake of it, I think that's also something of just the period where it almost has, not every film obviously, but a lot of films have this sort of like stage acting sort of manner to it. Like,
oh yeah.
Like I've specifically noted in the beginning of this film, we're introduced to a married couple, a cop and I guess former prostitute. And there was just one particular scene where it's a panning shot. They move from one side of the room over to the other. And it makes sense for the woman, for the wife, to walk over there. But the husband stays in perfect frame the entire time walking over, and then like just rests his head on the opposite side of the frame when they arrive. And I'm like, that felt like someone walked through the blocking and was like, you need to be here and then here and keep this close to her the entire time.
Which, and I'm not mad at that. To be like,
no, not at all.
It makes for a moment, it feels.
But it is just one of those things where I feel the structure behind it.
Sure,
I feel it's whereas nowadays you get far more, especially with more rapid cuts and stuff like that. This movie hung on a lot of cuts for much longer than any action film nowadays would.
Which I think there's parts of this movie that do feel a bit slow paced by today's standards, but I would say that the positives far outweigh the negatives compared to like a modern action movie, in that I prefer that there's longer cuts. It makes things feel more real. There's definitely a few things that's lacking, like I think this is spilling in to say that I don't think you ever really get a good proper big wide shot of the boat overturned. Like even at the very end when you see a little bit of it, it almost feels like they tried to do it with a miniature probably and decided it didn't look good enough, so they just avoided showing it. And I can respect that, and I understand why they've made that choice, but I'm like, you know what, that's the one benefit you'd have of having like doing this movie now. And I know there was a remake, which I mean I'm sure we'll get to, maybe like a remake season or something. We'll do remakes of movies we've already done.
Perfect.
One month. But I imagine that one of the benefits of doing a modern version of this would be that we can just do that big shot that you kind of want at least what I love that. I would love not showing it till the end. I think that's actually a really smart choice, is that you never see anything that these characters don't see. You never get like the wide perspective, really. There's a couple of shots of like when there's like explosions happening underneath when the chimneys or whatever, that they'll show a little bit of a wide shot, but by and large, if the characters that we're following don't get to see something, we're not seeing it either, and it keeps us with them and their sort of claustrophobia and like, are we ever going to see daylight again? Are we just screwed? Are we just going to die in here? Like, yeah,
I think that's probably, I mean, the opening credit sequence is all aerial shots of what I can only assume are a miniature. But then once we get into the ship, it basically stays in the ship the whole time, except for the odd explosion or something like that. But even then, I kind of wish that they would have kept those explosions inside. I think that it actually did a disservice to see specifically where, because they said, long story short, without spoiling anything too much, the entire goal, as they established in the beginning, is to get to the engine room. That's where they want to be at. And I think to have these explosions going off and then not being able to visually see where they are on the ship is much better of saying, like, is the engine room still going to be there by the time that we arrive?
That's a very good point, because especially since it actually comes up at one point where they're not sure and they have the debate, and we won't talk about it just now, but I think maybe this is a case of where the limitations of the technology of the time was a benefit to the movie, because it kept these wider shots to a minimum, whereas like maybe today, because they can whenever they want to cut to a big CG shot of the ship, like maybe the fact that they're restrained in that way actually benefits this in a number of ways. And I think by and large, because it does feel more grounded, and because it is like people climbing awkwardly up structures that are upside down, and because like we can all kind of picture these rooms upside down, so it all feels like, okay, I can understand the logic to some of this and like why things are where they are for the most part. And water's coming in, and like you understand the risk, you understand the threat, you understand there's a bit of a time element, because like the ship's ultimately going to sink now that it's upside down, So
without spoiling anything, the one scene in this movie that just immediately enamored me was there's a young boy character, and they all split up at one point, and the boy ends up in the men's bathroom, and he just walks in because obviously he needs to use the restroom, but all the toilets are now up on the ceiling. And it holds for a good like 20 seconds of him just like looking up, trying to figure out how he's going to do this. And I thought that was a great scene because it doesn't do anything. It's no like music playing. There's no womp womp or anything. You could just feel the kid just being like, huh. All right.
All those years of practice peeing up the wall is finally going to come into play. It's a good point. I think the crisis itself is short enough that the idea of worrying about food and water and stuff is not really a concern. It's like, it's all happening in such a short span of time that like, no, this is about getting out and surviving if we can. And
I mean, they do have a conversation at one point talking about trying to find food or water. And I same point as you. I think it's only been like at most 2 hours maybe.
Yeah, even if you stretch it a bit more than that, because obviously this all happens on the New Year's Eve party. They literally have just counted down to midnight when everything kicks off. So it's you have a bit of a context for the time of year. Makes it. I've never heard of anyone saying this is a New Year's movie that you should watch at New Year's, but maybe it would work. It's technically set in New Year's.
I mean, what would really be a New Year's theme? I can't imagine anything. I guess new beginnings, but I don't think that anything in this movie screams new beginnings.
Ships turned upside down, out with the old.
Old Lang Syne, whatever, moving on.
There's a whole scene where they're all singing Auld Lang Syne. There it goes.
Yeah, they do. I guess my question is if it were to be a New Year's themed movie, something that would feel good to watch around New Year's.
I never promised feeling good. What did I promise that?
I guess, yeah, I just inferred that. I always want to be able to ring in the new year with death and destruction and whatnot.
Look, there's a lot of Christmas movies and movies set at Christmas. New Year's is a little bit more, bit more desolate in that regard. So I just think any one you can take where you can say this is a New Year's movie. For someone who wants to watch movies at New Year's, this is one of your options. This and New Year's Evil. I've got two to recommend.
I would suggest watching this right like the night before you're about to go on a cruise. This and Titanic. Just watch them back to back.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny because I was on a plane last month on my trip, and literally something I watched like the week before, like without like being able to predict it would have this, had like a plane scene where the plane starts to like crash. Like, come on, really? I don't need this in my life right now.
Yep.
But hey, a whole bunch of characters we should sort of introduce in this part of the review. So obviously we have Gene Hackman as the Reverend, who is set up quite, well early on. He's debating with another priest, because you don't even realize he's also like a man of faith at first, because he's talking to a priest about how, if you're in I think the example he uses that if you're like stuck out in the ice somewhere or something, you don't pray for God to help you. You're just going to freeze to death. That's stupid. Like, you have to do it yourself. You have to get up and do something. And so it's almost like a twist when the other priest is like, "Do you sure you believe that, Father?" Like, wait, what? Yeah. So he's like a sort of radical priest who is like, yes, believe in God, but like you have to do it with God's like strength.
I believe the way I've always heard it is God helps those who helps themselves.
There you go. That's the phrase. So that's very much his character that's set up early on. Like you said, we have this married couple who is a detective and a former prostitute, and I have to say the scene that gives us all that exposition early on with them might be the greatest romantic scene in the history of cinema as far as I'm concerned. I like so Ernest Borgnine, yeah, he's actually a really cool actor. He just popped up in a movie we did on Ace. He's got a small role in Gattaca.
Okay. I mean, I think that the general public would know him as the voice of Mermaid Man in SpongeBob.
That's probably very true. But he's the detective here, and he's a solid actor. He's a really good presence. He feels like a character actor. But the scene with the exposition that sort of explains some of their backstory, him and Linda, like I was laughing because it was like such a, I don't want to say cliche. That doesn't feel quite right, but it's such like an overly dramatic like backstory for this couple being together, which is that she's a former prostitute and she doesn't want to go to the New Year's party, and he says, "Look, is this because you may get recognized?" And I at first I thought he meant she'd done porn because like,
Right.
recognizable. I was like, oh, is that because she was in like some movies or something? And then it turns out no, she was just a prostitute. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, okay, that's a bit. And then he gives the correct argument. He's like, do you know how likely it is that someone on this ship, like, I mean, how many customers did you really have? Like, really?
Right.
And she thinks she recognized someone, and he's like, whatever. But like, it turns into this like sweet scene where she's like, you arrested me like so many times, because she says like, why did you marry? He's like, well, I married you, didn't I? So obviously I don't care about this past. He's like, yeah, but you arrested me like 6 times. And he's like, well, yeah, how else could I keep you off the street until I could marry you? And it's like this, and she goes quiet, and it's like this sweet thing. I'm like, this is like the most absurd romantic like connection scene I think I've seen in quite some time. Like, it's kind of silly, but I also kind of loved it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was as soon as it came down to like, okay, he's a cop, because I think there's one scene with them beforehand where a doctor's coming in the room. I think that was established at that point that he was a cop.
Yeah, she's seasick. Yeah.
Yeah, and then this scene opens it all up with everything you just said, and it just kept going. Like, that was the part that got me.
It went much further than, like, I think I expected to cut away as soon as like he was saying, oh, you worried someone might not recognize you. Maybe there'd be like a little stinger where she comes out and says something, and then it would cut to another scene. But it just kept going and revealed all of this.
I was half expecting it to be like, the stereotypical of like, remember when we first met? Remember we were out there on 6th Street? You were working the corner. I was in my car. And just go through the whole thing.
Actually, that's a good point. That's what it kind of felt like. It felt almost like this is a scene where 2 actors would use it as an audition scene or for their demo reel, because we can do a lot of drama because it's like, I'm a cop and she's a ex-prostitute, but we fell in love, damn it. So there's all this backstory and history.
I mean, I could definitely see some high school drama class performing this scene.
Oh man, so I don't know. I got a good chuckle at all this. So we have them. We have an older couple who are just kind of the sweet old couple.
The Rosens. The husband of which is, of course, Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka.
Oh, I didn't even realize. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
This is the year after he starred in Willy Wonka. He went to this.
Wild. So they're just kind of a sweet old couple, and she like really cares about this other guy who's there, this younger guy who's she's worried that he's lonely because he's always jogging at the same time, and he's kind of this like slightly neurotic guy who's like kind of sweet, but he's he's taking all these like extra pills, like not for medicine reasons, but for
like vitamins and
such.
vitamins
and shit like that. But he seems sweet enough, so he's there. We have the little boy, like you said, and his big sister who are traveling alone. So it's like a teenage girl and her little brother who are traveling to meet their parents, I think, in a destination.
Yes, this is a trip from New York to Greece.
Yeah, so they're going there. We have them. There's like a sort of band that's playing at the party who are apparently they're getting a free trip because they're playing the music for free, but the woman singer of that band becomes one of our central characters as well.
And her name is Nonnie. Nonnie.
Yes. Other notable name in the movie is Roddy McDowall, who plays a member of the crew named Akers. And he's doing, I think it's meant to be a Scottish accent, but I
mean, at one point they said the bagpipes. Yeah, that's all I got going off it.
That could also mean Irish, but I think he was trying to do a Scottish accent. Now, Roddy McDowall is an English actor. He was born in England, and it felt like he was trying to put like a sort of Scottish twang on these sentences, but like I could hear English a lot of the time anyway. I don't know. It was kind of
I don't know,
a bit all over the place. But obviously he's famous for the Planet of the Apes movies, which obviously is very relevant at this time. This would have been like the second or third one would have like been out the same year as this. So so no, very good. And then other than that, is there anyone I'm missing out of the main group?
We have out of the main group. No, that's all out of the main group.
Okay.
But just honorable mention is the captain, played by Leslie Nielsen.
Oh, of course. Which, what, this is not his fault because Naked Gun and Police Squad so successful. Yeah. But it's impossible to not expect him to like do some silly joke at the end of every scene, and he never does it because he's a serious character in this.
Yeah, there was one point where the wave's approaching and they just rang in the new year, and he's looking over at the radar and he's like, "Well, we're gonna have to do this, that, and that. By the way, Happy New Year." And I was like, "Is that a joke?" It feels like you're setting up the same sort of humor that's in like Airplane. I
I felt like at any moment he was going to turn and say something like someone tell Norbert to get a bucket or something like
Absolutely.
like just some sort of Naked Gun line, and he never does. He's a serious character in this.
Mm-hmm.
Also, he looked the same age for like 40 years because he looks the same in this as he does in like Naked Gun and Naked Gun 3, which spans all the way to the 90s at least.
Yep.
And I think he had a cameo, or he had a small role in Scary Movie 3, which was the 2000s, and I swear he still looked the same in that.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
He went, grey-haired, very young, and just looked the same for decades and decades. It's he's just got one of those genes.
Yep.
But yeah. Also, shout out to Ernest because I when I was looking up some of the actors, I noticed that he made it to 92. And he does not look like a man who was going to make it to 92, so credit to him.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
Yeah, so credit to him. But yeah, so that's our cast of characters. Obviously there's a lot of red shirts running around because it's a full cruise ship, but
yeah.
I
don't
know if cruise is the right word actually, but
no, it was a cruise. I don't think that there was no character that really stood out to me as annoying or unnecessary. I think the closest you get is Akers, but even then that has a lot of plot relevance, and he wasn't annoying, but I don't know, he felt like he was just the map for the entire time he was there.
Yeah, I think like his voice was annoying me because it was like and it's not just because I'm Scottish, it felt like he was trying to do an accent and it was kind of comical.
Right.
It doesn't matter that it happened to be like my accent, but everyone kind of serves some kind of purpose. I have like maybe one slight observation that I'll make when we're in spoilers about like what characters make it and what don't, and just a slight maybe I say it's a small thing. It's not even really that big of a deal, but
brings it down 2 points automatically though.
I never said that. So no, I mean obviously I feel like the strategy with a lot of these disaster movies, especially this and definitely Tower Inferno, which has got like an all-star cast, like it's insane how many faces are in that are famous at the time period.
Right.
But it's very much about the movie's more about the spectacle and the survival like scenes that they're going through, but then you just anchor it with some like proper names, and in this case you have Gene Hackman to sort of headline it and give it some like weight. And it's not necessarily going to convince you or make you pretend that it's not just like a fun action survival movie at its core, and it's not like a deep thing by any means. I mean, it's getting deeper as it goes on because the ship's sinking, but
Tiss.
That was a quality joke. Everyone enjoyed that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
You know who you are. But I think that's fundamentally like even a great disaster movie. It's not high art. It's not like great.
Oh, no.
But it's good spectacle cinema potentially, but it's not it's not going to compare to your Godfather or your
Yeah, no, I think the best that a disaster movie can hope for in terms of getting that sort of artistry is character piece, where it puts together these disparate characters and sees, you can trap people in basically a bottle episode for the entirety of the movie via these disasters. These people are all trapped in this ship. They cannot get away from each other. And I think the most skillfully done disaster movies are going to be the ones that do those analyzations of how do these people, when forced together, either work or don't work together.
It's when you've phrased it like that, you've made me realize like just how similar to something like Night of the Living Dead a disaster movie is, and how that is a good example that is lauded for all the right reasons, because it is this character study of how this the social structure of the characters and what they represent and how it breaks down, or how anything that's a sort of group of characters trapped in a location. It's just that disaster movies inherently have to have a lot of like big spectacle action scenes, and that tends to take over, and why they don't necessarily have as much time to delve into that stuff. Whereas something like Night of the Living Dead, which is more of a low budget horror movie, does delve into that because that's what it's going to focus on outside of its spooky stuff. So that's just an interesting comparison that I never really considered. But cool. So I think we'll give spoiler warning, and we'll just work through some of the bits and pieces of the movie that I think are worth talking about.
Spoiler warning, the boat sinks.
Technically, you never actually see it sink in the movie. It's still, at least part of it's still sticking out of the water at the end.
I mean, we do have a sequel, so...
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't know if it's the same boat. It might be, because the movie's about the second movie that we're going to do, which I've not seen, but I'm just reading the synopsis. Mm-hmm. It's about thieves going back to pillage a ship that's been overturned. So I don't know if it is the same. It could literally be the ship that they're going back to steal from, but I don't know.
I don't know.
Doesn't have to be, though.
You too can find out for as low as however much money per month.
$3 per month.
$3 per month.
Yeah, there you go. So... Yeah, you know, it introduces the characters. It makes you like the captain a little bit because he's nice to the boy, even though he's like dealing with. In fact, I was surprised that this character didn't stick around for longer. Actually, not the captain per se, because that was kind of like that was your Drew Barrymore and Scream. Let's have a big star like go out in the first act, kind of to make it feel like a big deal. But there's this like the blood-sucking lawyer character who represents the company who owns the ship, who basically puts them in danger by insisting that they don't take proper precautions, by going, he's like, no, we're behind schedule. I don't care how safe it is. We need to keep going now. Pick up speed, full steam ahead, all that shit. I was expecting it to stick around a lot more because I feel like this is also a bit of a trope in some of these movies. Not all of them, but this type of character who's there to like basically make things more dangerous with his ignorance, because it's all about the money and the corporate side of things.
Because, I mean, in terms of this movie, I don't think there's pretty much anything they could have done to stop a 90-foot wave from tipping them over.
Nah.
But in particular, basically they were saying, hey, because of this guy's actions, the ship is too top-heavy. And they would have loaded in some, like, extra water to even it out so that it would not be too top-heavy. But he said, no, keep it light. We're going to get there by like the end of the night or something like that. So
yeah, it affects how it starts sinking and how it so like there is consequences to what he was doing, but maybe they could have played with that a bit more. I don't know.
I mean, like you're saying, I think that easy way to just rewrite it to have him survive is keep this ship going, don't slow down for anything. I'm going down to the New Year's party. And then he just ends up there, but instead he dies at the same time as everyone else. So
yeah, during the wave, because everyone up on deck, which is, most people are at the party in the big ballroom area in the ship, but obviously some of the crew and some, the captain's up in the bridge and stuff, they all, they're instantly killed effectively because they're up top when the wave hits, and when the ship turns upside down. So, yeah, it sets up the characters well enough. I mean, we kind of went into like how it sets most of them up for them, by and large, like we talked about the scenes that they get. Some of them do feel more important than others, right? Obviously, Hackman and the detective, they feel the most important of the male characters. In terms of the female characters, it's probably like the two wives that feel the most important out of them. They definitely get more than like the teenage girl, and the band girl is just kind of silent a lot of the time.
I mean, band girl, she's definitely at the lowest of the totem pole, but up until the third act reveal, I would honestly put the older woman under the teenager. I feel like the teenager was given a lot of wiggle room there, and not all of it on the up and up, considering the age she was portraying.
Yeah, well, I think by the end though, that the older wife is a more prominent character.
By the end, it definitely becomes more, but I think that only is in the last act. I don't think that it was before that.
Yeah, but to be fair, they do kind of set it up though. Like there's like a build of her like thinking because she's overweight, she keeps thinking, oh, I'm just going to stay back when everyone else is leaving early on because I don't think I can survive. And then she's constantly thinking, oh, can I fit in there because I'm too fat? Can I do this because I'm too overweight? And she's constantly scared. So when she gets her sort of big payoff where she's like, no, wait, I used to be a swimmer. I can actually help in this situation in a way that no one else can. Even though it's been a long time since it's because I was like in high school. Right. But like, I trained to hold my breath for long, and that's a skill that's not necessarily, went away potentially. Although the fact that she seems to have a heart attack or whatever when she's finished.
I was going to say, this boat killed most of the people in this party, but surprisingly not all the people. Like, I feel like that's kind of the thing in a disaster movie where the disaster usually gets to claim all the deaths, but strangely enough, someone got away.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I mean, I guess I kind of like the idea that some of the deaths were either preventable because of people's choices.
Oh yeah.
Or,
well, no, it especially comes down with Gene Hackman's whole thing, where basically as soon as this party splits off from the rest of the party, he basically says, as a reverend, like, I will not let my people die. These people will make it to the end. And every single time one of them dies, it feels that much more personal because he's made this oath to get them all out.
But it goes back to his introduction where his attitude with these crises, because they just want to stay there, because there's a guy at the ship, I can't remember his title.
The purser.
There you go, the purser, right? Who's claiming, like, I'm the one who really runs this place. And what he means by that is and he describes it, he actually says it, in the dialogue, he says, this is effectively a hotel that's on a boat, and I'm the hotel manager. So that kind of makes me more important than the captain. Yeah, except for any of the sailing shit, obviously.
I mean, when has the sailing shit ever... Oh, right, this time.
Yeah. But he's like, oh no, this boat's built to withstand certain things, blah 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 blah. We should stay here until they come and rescue us. But Gene Hackman's thing right from the start of the movie, even the story he's telling at the start to the other priest is, no, be proactive. You should do something to save yourself. No one's going to come and save you necessarily. You have to actually try and save yourself. So that's his like mantra throughout the whole movie. We have to keep moving. We have to do the most logical thing, and the most logical thing, based on because the kid's like a boat, like, not, he likes boats.
He gets on, he's like the kid who's like, wow, did you know that this and that and the other thing about this boat?
But the logic is that the hull's at its thinnest at the back of the ship, so that's where they're going to go. And there's a really funny moment here where Borgnine, because the kid says, like, the hull's the thinnest there, it's only 1 inch thick, and he crouches down and goes, kid, do you know how thick 1 inch of steel is? And I really wanted the kid to go, yeah, 1 inch.
Yeah, this much.
Yeah, an inch is still. I mean, I know it's harder to cut through because it's steel, but it's still less. I mean, as Gene Hackman puts it, it's still less than 2 inches.
Yeah. Do you know how thick 1 inch of steel is? 1 inch less than 2 inches. Let's go.
No, but there's actually a logic to it, because at the end of the movie, when some of them finally get there, it's like, yeah, the rescue team go there to cut through because that's where they can cut through because it's thinner there.
Yeah.
There's some logic to that.
Yeah, I believe the logic, but I also think, I don't know, it felt a little bit Deus Ex Machina-y for me.
I mean, it's a bit coincidental that the minute they get there is when there's like people on top like banging and saying, hey, like, is there anyone down there?
Yeah.
But it's the sort of thing, they've been through so much hell that as a movie, you're happy for them to get the win. You're like, yes.
I mean, as soon as it came down to that last scene and they didn't have it be like, oh, the explosions have already opened up a hole in the hull. If they weren't going to go that route, then yeah, you either have someone on the outside or you let everyone die. Well, and that's just how you want the mood of the movie to go. Exactly.
And I think it works thematically with the movie because, so the whole thing with Gene Hackman's character is that he believes that you have to be proactive, and there's various moments where people challenge him. He says, no, we have to keep doing something. We have to keep going this way. And at one point and we'll talk about some of the scenarios they go through, but at one point they encounter other survivors who were, just because they were lower to begin with, but obviously they're higher up now because it's upside down, and they survived, and they're going towards the front of the ship, and he's like, no, that's the wrong thing because that's the side that's starting to sink. Like, that side's going to go underwater first, so that's the stupid direction to go in. And there's a bit of a debate, and he's determined, and he leads them through all this thing, and by the time we get to the end, like, 2, 3, 4 characters, however many it's been, have died by the time we get there. And Gene Hackman's character makes a sacrifice. He sacrifices himself. There's like a final hurdle. There's the hatch that's going to lead to like the final area of the ship they need to get to that bit of the hull. Yep. And there's like a pipe that bursts, and there's like steam coming out, hot steam coming out, and it's like literally blocking their access to this door. And Hackman jumps to the lever, knowing that he can't come back from it. But as he's doing so, he's basically yelling at God and saying, hey, you prick. Like, we have done all of this. We've made it this far. Don't you dare. Like, you let these people through. Like, you give them a chance. But he does it by, like, sacrificing, and he falls to his death in the fire. He lets go. It's a big sacrifice moment. So it's kind of putting his money where his mouth is, where it's like, it's not just that he's saying all these things. He's willing to be the one who actually does it, even if it means his own end. So I think you can kind of read the ending as, like, a reward for, like, his faith, if you will. That, the reason why people happen to be there to save them was the Deus Ex Machina of, well, he earned this. Like if there is a god, and the way he talks about this god is like it's a very. He's not this worshipping priest. He's like, this is a very kind of like confrontational relationship where he's like, F you, dude. I'm going to prove myself and you have to give back because I proved that I deserve it. And I've earned their lives. So we've lost enough. If you're taking one more person, take me. That's an exact line of dialogue that he has when he's like yelling at God.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I think that something just going through this, obviously there's this semi-religious thing going on the entire time. I don't know how familiar you are with religious parables and stuff like that, but the three that were really jumping out with me was...
Not at all, for the record, but go on.
Fair enough, then I'll explain my reasoning. Noah and the Ark, for obvious reasons, particularly with the party scene where he's basically shouting down to these people, hey, this place is going to flood. You will not survive here.
To be fair, then, I know the story of Noah's Ark, right? To be fair, I didn't realize you were going to go that broad with it. But
I mean, I'm going to get more specific, but that was the first obvious one. And then the floor breaks open, the flood comes up, and people are literally trying to climb up to him, and nobody else makes it.
Which just since we're on this. This was the timing one that made me sort of go, really, movie? This quite like it's literally the second that his group that he's convinced to leave and climb up the Christmas tree to get to this, the lower deck, as it were, up top. The second like he's up there is when the water starts bursting through, and
it's not even the second he's up there. It's the second that he explicitly says, "Come with me," and they say, "No, we'll be safer down here."
Splish. Yeah. Yeah, like, it's very funny how quick it is. And then of course, because they're all trampling up the tree at the same time, it tips over.
Yep.
And that's it, you're all dead.
The second religious one is the story of Job. This is particularly one where it's that God is basically testing one of his most devoted followers and, keeps on taking and taking and taking. The difference being is that in the story of Job is like, it's okay, I still believe. Whereas Gene Hackman character is like, screw you, dude. I don't need you.
I think that's why I liked them, because as an atheist, these types of religious characters, like, depending on how they're handled, can either work for me or not, depending on what it's trying to do. But I kind of liked his confrontational attitude. It was kind of like, like, you know what, if you're up there, you bastard, like, prove yourself now. I've earned the proof. Damn it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like that.
And then the last one is not so much biblical, but Dante's Inferno. The story as they make their way deeper into the boat, as same way Dante makes his way deeper into hell, they're actually getting that much closer to being saved. Yeah. And in the end, I mean, the last shot is literally a hole into the sky opens up, and they are pulled through it. Like, that's as close as you're going to get to the story of Dante, really.
No, these are all wonderful things to bring up that do add a little bit of depth to like what the movie's doing. I don't know how strong these allegories are that it's playing with necessarily as a movie, but certainly, given that it's a religious character and that there is at least some talk of like his beliefs and how that's shaping how he handles the situation and then how he acts at the end. At the very least, it does paint a strong enough character that his sacrifice at the end does mean something. Like, it does feel like, it feels like, especially since it's right after a couple of deaths. There's a couple of key deaths towards the end. I did think it was a bit... like, I thought it was a little shitty that, like, the two most prominent female characters get fridged, and...
Yeah.
That felt a bit weird, especially since they happened pretty much back to back, because the older woman dies after she does the swimming thing, and she saves Gene Hackman by doing so, but then she dies right after, and we get, the sad scene of her husband, like, crying and not wanting to go on, but, Hackman kind of convincing him. But then we get, Linda, the cop's wife, just, there's a bit of an explosion somewhere that causes the ship to shake, and she falls as they're climbing, and she falls into the fire and the pit, and, hers was so sudden, which... Like, I get the purpose of it in the moment to get them at their lowest point where Hackman is going to make this final kind of sacrifice. But it did kind of feel like, oh, wait, shit. Like, the two female characters that we've put the most time into... Admittedly, Hackman kind of evened the scale up a little bit. Because before Hackman died, it was like, okay, it was Akers who died first, and then the two most prominent female characters. Hackman does kind of balance it out a little bit, because, like, he has agency in his, though. He gets to choose to die.
That's true.
And to be fair, the older woman does choose to like take the risk and swim to like try and save them. You know, she does do a heroic act. To be fair as well.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel that the whole thing was that they have to swim through an underwater tunnel and come out the other side. Gene Hackman, he volunteers to go, and he's taking a bit too long. To which point the woman jumps in and says, "Oh, I was this world-class swimmer when I was younger," and she jumps down in the water and saves him. And then she comes out and has a heart attack, or some sort of other thing happens where just her body was not able to keep up. I felt like that was some Final Destination crap going on there, where it was like, no, I'm owed a death. Someone's gonna die here.
I mean, it worked well enough for me. I think her motivation to feel useful worked for me.
Absolutely. But that's what I'm saying. That entire scene, I understand what you're saying is that over the movie itself, it built up her desire to feel useful, in that she was always just, I literally have my third note down here is Belle, which is her character name, is literal dead weight.
Yeah.
And I was writing that as the point where they were dragging her up that ramp of the upside down stairs. Everyone else managed to walk. Everyone else managed to like move their way up along with the assistance of the rope, but not her. She was just like dead weight being pulled up the whole way.
That said, though, the kid did have like a banger of a line during this moment as well.
Oh, absolutely.
The kids helping because they're using like a fire hose.
Up the thing with.
Yeah, they're using the fire hose to pull her up, and the kid says, "Don't worry, miss. I helped my dad pull in a 600-pound fish." Which, by the way, what fish when you go fishing would be 600 pounds?
A marlin, a swordfish. I don't know if that's accurate. No, I'll give it a look.
I'm trying to imagine a father and son going fishing and pulling in a fish that weighs 600 pounds. That's a pretty big fish.
The weight record for swordfish is 1,300 pounds.
What?
So halfway in the middle there, I'm going to go ahead and say probably. The ocean's a big place, man.
I did not realize, like 600 pounds. Like I'm thinking like a whale at 600 pounds. I mean, I'm sure that'll be heavier than 600, but
oh yeah,
like you know,
it's the ocean allows for bigger things than you could possibly fathom.
I did not think a swordfish was that big, but fair enough. I've learned something today. But yeah, but they did bring that line back up though, where the kid realizes, oh, that probably came out quite insensitive.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because she's not that big.
Well, it's even better when he brings it up. He's like, by the way, miss, I hope you didn't mean that the wrong way. Like, I just meant that I was able to help. And she's like, that's what you're worried about? You're fine, kid. Don't worry about it, man.
That's the thing. Like, she keeps saying that she's too fat for things. We should point out that she's a bit overweight, but she's not like that big. She's kind of what I would say a typical woman her age is commonly size wise.
I mean, she's definitely. It's not like, you know, character actor wise, where it's you got to get someone specifically to be that horrifically obese on camera.
No.
It's just an average weight, and I think it's. I mean, yes, they did focus on her weight a few times, but I also think that they equally focused on her age.
Yeah.
Because she is at this point, I mean, the actress is only like 52 at the time of filming, but it's played up that she has a grandson, and that's the whole reason that they're taking this trip is to go see their grandson. She's supposed to be up there in years, and therefore just not as mobile, I think is what they're really trying to get across.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that other characters only reference it after she says it herself. So it's almost like her self-doubt makes them just doubt her. Not because they necessarily think she is too fat, but just because, well, she's just going to be a problem, so I don't want to get stuck behind her, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, she is literally the only person out of the initial crew, barring Ernest Borgnine's character, kinda, that is just straight up like, no, I'm just going to stay here. I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah. I mean, Borgnine's character does kind of get confrontational with Gene Hackman. Sometimes it makes sense, and obviously when his wife falls to her death, it makes sense that he's instantly like, oh, yeah, you got her killed. Like, and obviously that's not really true. It's not his fault there was a tremor at that moment, but, you know, like, I understand why he's upset at the moment. And at least they did like such a good job of making that pair, like him and his wife, be a memorable set. Because I wouldn't say, as much as I'd say Linda was the other most, like, spent, you know, the other most prominent female character, it's not so much that she hadn't that much of an arc or anything. She just had a lot of time where she got to bounce off of him. She got to have these lines, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say really nobody in this movie had a particular arc. Everyone kind of just ended up where they began. The only person I would say that had an arc would be the band singer and the weird guy, like the neurotic one. Those were the only two who, like, over the course of the movie, they found their footing and, like, managed to do more than they originally would have been able to do. But everyone else kind of just ended up where they started.
I will say, 2 points on this. One, I appreciate that, like, the whole thing with the neurotic guy is that, he needs to find a wife, and obviously it's very clear that, like, him looking after the band singer is like, maybe that's going to be, like, someone he can... I appreciate that they didn't actually do anything, like, super romantic with it. He's just there for her, so she sort of, like, feels safe around him, and it never does anything else. It's just like, like, they might become a couple after the movie, but the movie didn't, they're not going to have the big passionate kiss in the middle of the third act or whatever. I will say, it depends how you define arc, because I do think that at least if it's not an arc, there is at least some payoffs to, like, the characters that are set up, much like Gene Hackman's sacrifice and speech at the end. Like, that feels like it's a sort of, a final point to his character. And likewise, having Borgnine, not believing in him, getting pissed at him, but then afterwards being like, he was right. The preacher was right. Like, he got us to where we needed to go. There is, like, setup and payoff to the characters, even if it's not necessarily arcs. And I think it's because this type of movie doesn't necessarily lend itself to having character arcs in the traditional sense. It's more...
not at all. Especially not with such an actual ensemble. Like, if for more like the movie 2012 or something like that, that's John Cusack's movie. However many other characters are in it, John Cusack has his arc. This one, yes, Gene Hackman, like you said, he has a payoff. Yes, Ernest Borgnine, he has a setup and payoff. And I do think everyone has a setup and payoff. Like, the kid... he's so adamant in the beginning of, we need to get to this location because that's where the Holocene is, and it pays off. Like, he was right. Yeah. They congratulate the kid for doing so. But it is always, for everybody except for the main two male leads, really, it's all functional. It's all as a result of the plot, not really as so much of, because we made it to the end, you have gotten your payoff.
Which I think's okay. I think this is all about what the expectations are of a movie like this. That
absolutely.
You have so many characters, you have all these action set pieces to go through. Like, having, like, an ensemble where everyone at least has some sort of payoff to the character is really all you can ask for.
I'm not expecting this movie to open up because there's 10 characters in the main group. I'm not expecting this movie to go in and show us how their flaw is, and then before some of them die and the rest of them before they leave, the flaw is fixed. Like, no, I'm not expecting that for every character. It is how they play with those flaws, how they play with each character, that makes it an interesting story.
And I think as long as you care enough when someone does die, I mean, Akers is a bit earlier on, and he's kind of there for like an early shock death, and he is kind of like a later character, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
But the others, I think they all have some impact, where the other three characters who die, the older woman, when she has this sudden heart attack or whatever it is after the swimming bit, like, when Borgnine comes through, because he swims through after to see what's happened, and he finds out that she's dead, he's nervous about telling the husband. What did I tell the husband? And when he goes back and he has this moment, it's like, okay, she got through, and she's did it, and she's basically, like, laid a path for us. She saved us all. And so he's phrasing it in this way, where because he's been this, like, he's kind of like this sort of, like, very loud character who's quick to, like, disagree with people. So him sort of, like, tiptoeing around the truth and trying to consider this, like, husband's feelings that he's talking to, as well as the group, it actually comes off as this really, like, sweet thing from him, because it's, like, so above and beyond, like, what his character typically does is when he's, like, interacting with others, that you feel the weight of it. Like, no, she's really dead, and he really feels the weight of that, and he's trying to, like, be as nice about it. And the husband kind of sees there's something happened in it, because you're kind of dodging the subject a little bit.
I specifically said the words, "Is she all right?" and you did not specifically say the word "yes."
No, he just repeats, "She got through." But it's like, no, she did that for us. She pulled this off for us, and that means something to him, that he recognizes that, and that's kind of that works. And then the death of the Linda, the wife of the cop, is that I think when he looks down and you see her, like, burning body, like, in the fire.
Did you actually see that? Because I tried to catch it and it just looked like the fire to me. I didn't see the body.
I mean, It's probably a dummy. It's not like it's
Well,
actually
yeah,
her, but like, yeah, no,
they didn't set her on fire.
No.
Darn, 2 points removed.
I saw the figure. Yes, I saw the figure
Okay,
in
fair
the fire. And he's looking down there and he's distraught. Like, I'm not saying the movie made me care about her character in the sense that I'm like feeling this big punch, but I believe how much he cares about her at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? So when he's looking down and he's feeling desolate, he's like, oh, this whole thing might fall. He might tackle Gene Hackman off this railing because he's so upset right now. You know, like, so I think it's effective. And then obviously Hackman's got the big sacrifice, so his death means something. But
yeah. Honestly, though, I would honestly say Acre's death also means something, because that's the first point. That's the first point where someone dies, and
yeah, that's fair.
They specifically have the scene mirroring the ending scene where Hackman blames Borgnine's character. He's like, I told you to kept everybody rounded up," and in the ending scene, Hackman almost kind of like takes responsibility for the fact that he led Linda here to die. He's like, yeah, okay, and I'll sacrifice myself. Like, I'm the only person who's going to die from this point forward. But in the earlier scene, when Hackman's accusing Borgnine of like, it's your fault he's dead, Borgnine just deflects the entire time. He's like, oh, well, he's dead. Nothing more to say about it. Let's move on. Like, he doesn't take any responsibility for it.
And that's why I think Borgnine might even have the biggest character arc, if I'm looking at it in terms of arcs, because his whole thing is that he does things by the book and he's a cop, and he doesn't really like he always does, he never wants to actually think for himself and just think of the solution. He always just goes whatever the rules say. And then he blames anyone for it. You know, whenever anything goes wrong, he blames Hackman because Hackman's the one who took him off the rule book, right? That's kind of the way it works. And then the ending is ultimately like, he's like, no, like he's like, hey, he told you to get them through. He turned to him and was like, you're the one who should be in charge if I go, so you get them through. Right, you do this. You save this group of people and you help them as a protector. Him sort of rising to that challenge after like Hackman sort of proved that he's not just all talk by sacrificing himself is kind of like, yeah, that's kind of his arc, and that he does ultimately take that responsibility and then is, you know, and rewarded for it ultimately with surviving and getting the people out. But he does that at the expense of losing his own wife. You know, it's not about his own personal like gains or like keeping what he cares about anymore. It's about doing it just to save innocent people, which is,
I mean, literally the last shot I think we get of Borgnine is he's looking up at the hole and everyone else is like so happy, so like,
yeah,
they're so happy that they're able to escape, that this he's the only person who's looking back. He's the only person who looks back through the door and was just like, is it even worth it, sort of thing. Where it's like, was it worth what we lost? So
yeah. But I guess what we're really complimenting here, because I don't think that a lot of these movies are going to hold up to this level of scrutiny, is we've just sat here and said that all four of the prominent deaths that happen out of the main group all add something to the film and all mean something, and they all matter. And I don't think that's going to be true when we start breaking down some of these other movies.
I mean, I'll personally, if that's the way that we're going to measure things, I will personally say whether or not I think, out of named character deaths, because Lord knows we had 4 named character deaths, ignoring the deck crew, but there were at least, I think, 100 on-screen deaths.
Oh yeah, there's the red shirts going left and right. And to be fair, like, it's a shame that so right after they've done the climbing out of the party area, Hackman like goes through the kitchen. And it's a shame that there's a really obvious shitty dummy for like a dead body in the foreground.
Absolutely.
And the reason why I say that's a shame is because in the aftermath of the actual, like, you know, the actual, you know, the capsizing and like the initial, like everyone sort of getting up and seeing like what's happened once they're first upside down, there's actually some pretty dark shots of just dead bodies, like the actors like, you know, portraying dead bodies just lying around. And a couple of them that you recognize because they were sitting at the table with some of the main characters. You know, there was like a woman sitting next to Gene Hackman who you see lying there dead. And I thought, for a movie from the early 70s that's, you know, a big mainstream sort of like blockbuster style. I mean, this is before blockbusters were called blockbusters, but this is effectively what this is. I thought, oh, this actually feels that there's some weight to this because it feels quite dark that we're just seeing these random dead people lying around in the ballroom. So it stuck out to me a lot when we got to that. I think it's because it's right at the edge of the frame, and maybe, you know, they thought, oh, no one's going to notice or whatever. I don't know. It's like we don't have to have the same level of detail for this scene. But I noticed it, and some
and
people,
that's enough.
Yeah, and some people might say, oh, but you're watching in like HD now and it's all remastered and stuff. I'm like, yeah, but 35mm film, which is the way this was shown at the time, is where that quality comes from. So that, you know, in theaters that quality was there, at least in assuming the print was of good quality, because obviously it degrades over time. But
spinning off the visuals, one major critique I had was the audio editing.
Sure.
And there were just two specific moments for it. The time where right after that scene, right after the party starts drowning and everything like that, and then right after Gene Hackman drops into the water. Both times the audio is just looping a scream, like at least 3 times in a row before they finally move off it. And it was really apparent to me. Like, I don't know if there was I'm sure there was some reason where, you know, they didn't pick up enough audio or something like that of the particular scream or of whoever talking to fill the visual time, but it was not blended well. It definitely was like super apparent the entire time that it was looping. So that's just on my side, things I've noticed.
Yeah, that's fair. Sticking with the audio, the music's good, I'd say. It's got kind of a bombastic kind of...
I mean, it won Best Original Song at the Oscars that year. So.
Song? Well, I don't know, but I was just talking about the score. What was the song?
I think that it was the song part of the score. I think it was called like Tomorrow or something like that. But yeah, John Williams did the score. So.
Oh well, that's why it sounded good. I didn't even realize it was John Williams' score. There you go. And this is like, you know, before he even did Jaws. This is like really early John Williams. That's kind of wild. So yeah, I mean, as far as like some of the set pieces goes, we've kind of brought them up and just talking about the characters, but yeah, you've got the initial capsizing and the climbing out of the ballroom. You've got the going through the kitchen, which is basically just Hackman himself, and then he says, "Okay, it's safe, let's go." And then you've got the going up the stairs, or the upside down stairs, which is the ramp. And then you're climbing through kind of the shaft, the big shaft that's filling with water. It reminds me a lot, obviously this came first, but it reminds me a lot of a sequence in Deep Blue Sea, which is a very similar cylindrical shaft.
Right.
That they're climbing up.
Yep.
And you've got that. But yeah, and then, you know, after that you're getting towards the ending where they try to get to the engine room. I appreciate that the goal never really changed. It was kind of like the same goal the entire time. It was just a case of, okay, this is the journey to get there. I think when we end up comparing this to some of the other disaster movies of the time period and ones that came later, is I think we're going to sort of find that this doesn't have the biggest all-star cast, and it doesn't necessarily have the biggest set-piece moments, but its fundamentals are probably going to end up feeling more solid, just because it has deaths that matter, characters that feel like they matter a bit more, and just a general satisfying overall movie experience. Because I don't think any of the situations they find themselves in are like some of the more memorable of a disaster movie, but they're all solid in like how they're portrayed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's honestly probably the only flaw I could really find in the movie is that if someone 6 months from now asked me, hey, what were the beats, what were the trials that they went through in Poseidon, I don't think I could tell them. I think the most I could probably remember is going to be the initial climbing up the Christmas tree one, just because it had a very iconic, here's this giant metal tree that we're leaning up against the thing, and it felt so bombastic as well the entire time that they were like picking up this tree and the whole team was leaning it up against the railing. It had a big music score to it, where a lot of this movie was pretty much absent of score during the big moments. Yeah,
there was only a few key moments where it came in. It came in obviously a lot towards the end. Do you think that the reason why, and there's more so in the book than the movie necessarily, but the reason why it's set in New Year's is so there would be a Christmas tree to climb?
I'm sure that they could have found any reason to do it. I think that the reason it's set at New Year's is just to add that extra bit of tragedy, where everyone is partying and then they all die.
Yeah, I suppose actually the main reason, if I was to think about it, now that I am thinking about it, it would be that it's what puts all those people in the same part of the ship. Like most of the people are at this party, and that's why. Because if it wasn't New Year's, then you would say that, okay, even if there's a party going on, a lot of people would sit it out. But because it's New Year's, most people will go to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It just needs some way to, because that's the point that Gene Hackman makes. He specifically says, everybody who was above this deck when the ship flipped over is definitely already dead. And the
Yeah.
movie does nothing to argue that point. So then, as soon as they get out of the room and we show that the water comes up from below them, which is above their point, we can assume, okay, he's correct. And we have visual proof that everyone is dead. So it makes us solely focus on these people as the only survivors. And obviously, we find out later on in the movie there was other people who I guess were even farther below deck and are now making their way towards the bow. But once again, we don't focus on them. They're just a temptation along the way.
And those survivors look mostly like staff. It was like the doctor, the nurses, some crew. You know, it was people who would have been working down below somewhere doing stuff.
Yeah.
So it made enough sense that there were some people in lower decks doing stuff. You know,
absolutely.
While the ship's
not
functioning.
everyone gets invited to the New Year's party.
Exactly. That was the thing. Borgnine's all proud at the start because he's been invited to sit at the captain's table for the party. Him and the Reverend get to go and sit at the captain's table.
Yep. I do love how his wife's one comment is just like, he just invited you because you're a lieutenant detective. I was like, is that really enough of a reason to be a lieutenant detective? Sure, okay. Must be a very lightweight ship.
I don't know. It depends who else is on the ship.
I mean, in fairness, the only people we see are 2 retirees, a haberdasher, a lieutenant detective, a prostitute, and 2 kids.
Ex-prostitute, I think.
Ex-prostitute. My bad.
Yeah. A slight note on her wardrobe actually is on that scene where they're having all the exposition. She's in like a nightie thing. And this thing is molded around her boobs to the point where there's nothing left to the imagination about the size and shape of those things.
Okay, here's I just want to bring this up real quick because they focus on this in the movie and it actually makes it a little bit creepier. Is that so the very first girl to climb up the tree is the young teenager, Gene Hackman, who this girl has a fascination with, to say the very least. He says, that dress is too long, gonna have to lose it. And she's wearing, of course, something underneath. So it's hot pants, but it's still something. Then the ex-prostitute comes up, Linda, she steps up and he's like, once again, that dress is too much, you're gonna have to lose it. But this time, all she's wearing underneath is her underwear. She doesn't have any actual clothes. So Borgnine's character has to give her a dress shirt that just kind of drapes over and covers her other bits.
Puts him in just the vest, which is a good die-hard look,
Absolutely.
for Borgnine. Yeah.
So, all fine so far, because the rules have been followed. Then Belle steps up, the older woman. And strangely enough, Hackman does not tell her that her flowy dress needs to go. Her flowy dress can stay.
That is a very good point. I didn't even think of that. That is a very good point. Just pointing out perhaps the hypocrisy of not so much Hackman's character. I mean, it is Hackman's character, but the just movie making, the Hollywood.
Yeah.
Hollywood.
It's like, I'm sorry, you're over the age of 40. You can keep the dress on.
Yes, although funnily enough, it's obviously more of a comedy beat, but he does actually touch her more than the other 2 women.
Oh, absolutely.
Because she gets
halfway up and then he realizes like, oh wait, I forgot to tell her to take off the dress. Well, I better get it in now.
She gets stuck, yeah. So he has to push her up via the ass cheeks. And then he follows up with, forgive me for getting familiar.
Yeah.
To be fair, I mean, maybe that's the point. Maybe he forgot to say that, and then she got stuck, not because she's overweight, but because the dress got stuck.
Her dress was caught. I think they actually did say something like that, how her dress was caught in a spoke. So
yeah,
maybe they had it for... But see, the only eventuality for that plot beat is to get Gene Hackman to touch her ass. So not really plot necessary there.
I mean, I can't really necessarily justify the difference between how he asked them to get their skirts away and not her. Mm-hmm. But I will say that having to push her up via her ass is important to her character because it's the first embarrassing thing that happens to her. It's this embarrassing moment that is going to propel this idea that she feels shitty about everyone having to help her and push her or pick her up the staircase or whatever it is. So
yeah, that's fair.
As much as it's played for a kind of a funny beat, because there's not a lot of comedy in this, I would say there's I think that's the other thing that separates this and maybe a modern disaster. I feel like a modern disaster movie, kind of in line with what Marvel movies do now, have to have a quota of funny characters
absolutely.
and funny lines, and I don't think this movie felt the need to do that by and large. And the few things that were there were kind of sweet, because it was the kid saying something about her weight and then apologizing for it, and it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of sweet and innocent enough.
Yeah, I think this movie did a good job of balancing the sort of, no, everyone here is freaked out. Everyone here's tensions are running high, and everyone's very quick to get emotional. However that goes, anger, grief, whatever it is, they are very quick to get there. But they don't have a character there who responds to fear or whatever with humor. There's no one who is just kind of jokingly the whole time be like, well, guys, I guess I'll see you guys in the kitchen. I'm whipping up some food or something like that. Like, no one's ever trying to make anyone else feel better. They are literally just focused on the mission.
Yeah. Yeah, by and large. I mean, there's like a few scenes where like Hackman or someone does try to make someone feel better, but it's not done through comedy. It's done through, genuine, like, trust me, we can get through this. I'll make sure you're okay. Like propping them up in more realistic ways that aren't. Here's a silly bit of hijinks to cheer you up. Yeah.
So like they very easily could have had the character who, like, they swim through that underwater tunnel and the guy comes out with like a fish in his underwear or something like that. It would have been so easy, but they didn't, and I appreciate that.
I also appreciate that. I think it would have lowered the tone of the movie quite a bit. So yeah, I would generally say I think this is a fairly solid movie, and I mean, it's a solid movie, and I think as a disaster movie, it's probably up there as one of the, like, I mean, this is the first one we're reviewing, so it's, we don't really have a baseline yet, but so obviously it is the best one we've done so far because it's the only one we've done.
This is the greatest 70s disaster film I've seen.
It's the only 70s disaster film you've seen.
My point stands.
So it'll be interesting to compare and contrast once we're getting to some more stuff. But I think we're about ready to rate the film. What were you thinking about giving this out of 10?
Out of 10. See, I'm trying to remember the ratings I gave like previous ones, so I could try to stay consistent between series and seasons and whatnot. I'd say that this is probably I'd say 7.5. I think that this is a very well done film. It does just have a couple things that, it doesn't feel timeless. It does feel a couple things in here where it is just very 70s. I would more so lean that on a couple lines of dialogue and the costuming, where you can tell, like, all right, this was made in a certain era.
It feels of its era. I think that's fair to say.
But the story itself is very well told. It doesn't mess around. It's not something where it's trying to be anything different than what it is. It's trying to tell the story of escape of these 10 people. Some of them make it, some of them don't. But it focuses on strictly what is necessary to that, while also being able to develop the characters well enough that you feel something when they leave or feel something when they survive. So 7.5 I feel is fair for that.
Yeah. It's a good question, because I'm fairly consistent with my ratings, but obviously it has slid a little bit over time where I've gotten a little harsher. Since when I started rating things out of 10 as a teenager, I think you'll find that I was a bit more lenient. But over time, I have become more jaded, and I've become a better gauge of quality because I've seen more.
As movies. Have we all.
And I think this is the sort of thing where it might have been a bit higher back in the day, but I still think it's a very good example of what it is. And I think the cast, by and large, you've got a couple of fun actors with good like personalities. Like, I think both Hackman and Borgnine have presence. Like, you feel them. They feel like actors. They feel like they're on the screen and they're helping you through this like story by like just having such a good strong presence, which is something that I don't think all actors have, and I think it's something that maybe we've lost from movies, particularly Hollywood movies, is that we have, I don't know, more generic like people that
we sacrifice talents for looks in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, that may be fair because it's not. I mean, Borgnine especially, like he's not like a pretty boy. You know, he's a really.
If you put like 20-year-old Ernest Borgnine into a casting room, I doubt he would be able to get past today's casting directors.
Yeah, now it's Tom Holland.
Okay.
You know, now it's like all of Borgnine's roles be go to Tom Holland now. How sad is that?
To be fair, everyone's teenage roles are going to Tom Holland right now.
But I appreciate that. There's a nice range of different types of faces because they're well, at least with the men, they're not scared to cast, you know, more typical looking people. Hollywood's a bit sexist and is always kind of veered towards pretty for the women.
Yeah.
That is absolutely true. But which is all this is to say, what's my rating? I think I just kind of agree with the 7.5. Is ultimately what I'm going to say.
More than reasonable. That's why I said it.
It's good. I think disaster movies inherently have a bit of a ceiling because they're never going to be just like high art. And I think similar types of film that can, like I brought up Night of the Living Dead, like they get to focus a lot more on the character and the analogy of the situation, like the microcosm of society that it's exploring, because they're not constantly having to survive like things. Like they get to have a bit more time to explore that side of it.
Yeah.
And that's maybe why. But
I think the only way I could see a disaster film getting a 10 is if the stakes are, or if the disaster is so large, there is absolutely no way to survive. Where it's just all the characters have already accepted death, and it's just the character study, and it does it amazingly. That's the only way I could see. But even at that point, would that be a disaster movie?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is I think at a certain point you're almost into a different genre if you do that. Like it's almost like the way we subcategorize this type of movie is just inherently putting a ceiling on it, because if it goes above that ceiling, it's not one of these movies anymore.
It's like a theme being the best Tommy Wiseau film. You're only going to be able to hit a certain point.
But I mean, for the record, I do like disaster movies. Like I say, I grew up watching the 90s ones, and I've liked a lot of the 70s ones that I've seen, and I think this is a very entertaining movie, and I think it's a really easy movie to watch, and I would recommend it if you like the sound of this sort of thing. Yeah. It's a fun time, and it's almost like the more spectacle driven we've gotten, the further we've moved into just absurdity, and it's kind of nice to go back to a time when this was spectacle filmmaking. Because it feels like, things hadn't gotten too extreme yet, so you can kind of enjoy it for the more, grounded stunt and practical based spectacle that it is, as opposed to, walls of CG and nothing else.
I mean, it does come down to there is a stunt inflation that's happened over the past 50 years where it's we start off with, you could just crash one car off a bridge and that'll be enough to get audiences to go, oh my God. But nowadays, you gotta take out an entire dealership before audiences even yawn.
Well, you say that, but I think if you show it in a single shot where there's no fakery, right?
No,
I think
I'm not saying that the audience does it. I'm saying that studios think that the audiences need that.
I think if you show something in such a way where it feels real because it's in a single take where you show, and that was something that I didn't love Baby Driver, but I think one of the things that stuck out about that movie is that simple scenes of a car just speeding around the street felt so much better than most driving scenes in other movies, just because we're going to do this in like a shot and the beat to the music, and it's going to feel really exciting because of that. It's just it's down to the filmmaking rather than like how excessive the situation is, ultimately. But and as far as the director of this, we never really spoke about the director. Just before we get to the other ranking that we have to get to is So Ronald Neame is the director, and he's known for this, Great Expectations from 46, and Golden Salamander and Brief Encounter, although that's a producer for that rather than the director. So, in fact, he's actually known as a cinematographer more than anything, apparently.
I was going to say, he was a cinematographer way back in early film. He was 30s and 40s.
Oh, that's way
old.
So
he was very old when he was, or very experienced, I should say,
before he switched to directing. It's interesting. He did, apparently there was a Gambit movie in 1966, the earliest X-Men character to get a movie, it turns
Channing
out.
Tatum, Eat Your Heart Out.
I'm kidding, of course, it's just the same title. But that seems to, he's got a couple of notable movies that he's done, but this might be his biggest one. He actually went on to do another disaster movie a couple of years later, called Meteor, which we will not be doing on this show because it is actually verging into sci-fi territory. So that'll be one for Tara and myself over on the Atomic Cinema Experiment.
The leftovers.
Hey, that was the only one. That was the only one I found that was like, nah, this really belongs in a different show. Everything else was definitely for us. But that's interesting. So yeah. But he wasn't directing movies for too much longer after. So he went up to the mid '80s, and then that was his time.
And I mean, yeah, but he lived until 2010, so he got to retire and keep going.
He got to enjoy 25 years of retirement, basically. Yeah. So who could ask for a better time? In fact, he lived to a good age. What, he was 1911 to 2010?
Yeah, 99.
that's a great run.
Fantastic.
So credit to him. But cool. All right. So yeah, the other question that I ask is, does it make the cut?
I mean, this one feels pretty easy to me. I think it makes the cut.
It makes the cut. Yeah, it makes the cut. It's not exceptional, so it's not a cut above, but it does make the cut. Yep. So yeah, we can concur on that quite easily. All right, cool. Well, there you go. That is the Poseidon Adventure. So, like I said earlier, patrons should have access once this goes public to the sequel that was made in 1979 called Beyond the Poseidon Adventure. So that's up for patrons. Next episode will be the Cassandra Crossing, which I've heard of, but never seen. So
you've never seen the Cassandra? The amateur hour over here.
Yeah.
That's the one about the bus, right?
No. I believe this is a virus that spreads on a train.
Okay.
So
interesting.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But I'm looking forward to checking it out. But yeah, of course, let us know what you think of this movie of Poseidon Adventure in the comments, and comment down below. You can like, subscribe, and ding the bell for notifications. All those things help out the channel. You can rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from if you listen to the audio version. But of course, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV if you want to support the show and get bonuses. You can do that over there. You get bonuses for this show, but also the other movie podcasts that we do. And of course, you can hit the super thanks button on YouTube as well if you want to do a one-time thing. But any and all help is appreciated, and we're super thankful for it. But this has been the Collector's Cut, and this has been our review of the Poseidon Adventure. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and
this is technically coming out on New Year's Eve, Pete.
Is it?
It is.
Did we time that by accident?
I guess we did.
Whoa, okay, well, in that case, my boat got turned upside down, and now I'm just a reverend with a death wish on the boat to Bel Air.